Welcome to the first webinar of the ICSA webinar series. I'm very glad to be here with you. And our topic today is intentional communities and social change. It's important to say that next year, ICSA will be celebrating its 40th anniversary, and we will be together for an in-person conference in Germany, in Lebensgarten. You are all very welcome to join us. And in order to start celebrating, we are launching this webinar series so we can warm up. Today, we will have a 1.5-hour session with three very complementary and rich presentations. We are glad to welcome Bill Metcalf, Iris Kunze, and Jan Bank. I'll be introducing each one of them. Thank you all. Very soon. So our idea is to launch a few webinars before the conference, and the next one is planned to take place in January 2025. Welcome. We will have a time to questions and answers at the end, so please take notes of your questions. You are also welcome to write them on the chat, but we will open the space very soon. Wonderful. So to start, the three presenters will share aspects of their research, and we will see how intentional communities influenced society in the past and how it continues up to today. And I think this is a great contribution from ICSA, the International Communal Studies Association. ICSA brings together academic research and practitioners. And here, our three presenters will emphasize this, the importance of theory and practice in our session today. So let me properly introduce Bill. Welcome, Bill. I'm very glad to have you with us here. Bill is a sociologist and social historian with over 51 years dedicated to living and studying communities and intentional communities around the globe. He's an honorary associate professor of the University of Queensland, awarded author of numerous books, chapters, reviews, articles, and so on. And Bill is currently building up a massive database of intentional communities in Australia. He also asked me to tell you all that he's not so familiar with computers and technology, so please forgive him in advance. Over to you, Bill. Such an honor to have you with us.
Thank you, Taisa. I'll do my best. Anton, can you turn the screen up, please? Okay, so we're talking about intentional communities, and because I'm starting off, I'm trying to get a few ground rules cleared out here. As Taisa mentioned, 51 years researching in this area. I started at the place called Nimbin in 1973, and I've been involved ever since then. So I've seen an awful lot of excellent research and a lot of rubbish. So I'm trying to clear a few things up. First of all, I'm going to define what we mean by an intentional communities, then talk about the types of intentional communities that we find, briefly the history, some idea of the numbers, longevity of communities, to whom they appeal, who's interested in this, and what did I think is the future. Now, you're welcome to argue with any of my things, my definition or whatever, but just bear in mind it's been around for 51 years and has stood up pretty well. So I'll just ask Anton to go on. So what is an intentional community? Now, when we come up with a definition, it's really important to know that we're including every group that we want to include and excluding those that we don't want to include. Okay, so some people come up with definitions like, oh, it's a bunch of people living together. Well, prisoners live together. Is that what we're studying? No, we're not studying them. Nuns live together. Well, no, we're not studying them. So this is my attempt at a definition from my PhD about 170 years ago to come up with a definition. So it's 5 or more people drawn from more than one family or kinship group. Why 5? I could spend the next 3 hours going through that, but it's based on social psychology research in terms of the complexity of interactions between groups, between dyads and triads. And most researchers agree that 5 is the minimum. So we're talking about that. And it's for more than one family or kinship groups. We're not talking about a clan. We're not talking about an extended family. We're talking about people, most of whom are not related. Second point, who have voluntarily come together for the purpose of ameliorating or overcoming perceived social problems and inadequacies. So that excludes, for example, recruits to the military who also live communally. They're not there for that reason. It excludes prisoners, for example. It excludes people who are serving on a submarine in very close contact with each other. They have to have the voluntarily do it in order to do something good. Now, what that something good is depends on the group. So sometimes these groups are wanting something good that isn't what you might like. Third point is they seek to live beyond the bounds of mainstream society by adopting a consciously devised and usually, I should have underlined that, well thought out social and cultural alternative. I've never ceased to be amazed at groups that I think, what in hell are you about and what are you doing? When you actually interview them, you find they have quite deep, meaningful explanations. The fact that it doesn't make sense to me is not relevant, but they have this. So they have this thought out, they're a cultural alternative in some ways. In pursuit of these goals, they share significant aspects of their lives together. Now that depends. It could be they own property together. It could be they just simply they eat together. It could be that's a free love group, so they have sex together and raise their children. Depends, but they share what they think is significant together. So it ain't just a suburb kind of thing or neighbors. It's sharing much, much more than that, as in a family. And the final point is participants are characterized by what we call a we consciousness. Now, that's where they see themselves as a continuous group, separate from and in many ways better than the society from which they've emerged. I've never yet found an intentional community that doesn't think they're better than where they've come from. Okay, so it's a very, and we consciousness means instead of talking about you and I, we talk about we. It's like most families will have a we consciousness, the idea that we are something different in some way. Okay, Anton? So what are the types? And I'm just running through some of these. Now, the most obvious one is commune, which is a term we don't use much anymore. Commune is almost always urban, and it's where a group shares practically everything. So they'll share property, they'll share income, they'll share child rearing, they'll share pretty well the lot. There are still communes around, and they're being created all the time. Typically, they're very small, half a dozen or 10 people, something like that. It's the social and psychological cost of living in a commune can be very high, and it could also be very rewarding. The next stage, almost the other end of the spectrum, is a cooperative. Now, cooperatives, typically, the cooperative owns the land and the property, and each member is a member of the cooperative. So it's much less intense, much less socially connected than a commune. Often people will even keep their own money. They might even eat separately. So cooperatives are quite low level on the eco-village. Well, eco-village is an intentional community whose main goal, or one of the main goals, is environmental protection, environmental repair sort of thing. And we have a number of these around the world. It's certainly a rapidly growing group of people. Some are very successful, both communally and in terms of looking after the environment, and others are very, very weak. It's up in the air. Co-housing is something that's only developed in the last 20 odd years, almost always urban. If not urban, then suburban. I haven't yet found a co-housing group out in the countryside. Typically in a co-housing group, each person or each little family unit will have a small apartment or something like that, but then they'll have a large dining area together and they'll share lots of things, perhaps cars and various things. It works very, very well in urban areas with people that aren't so committed to intentional communities. The savings in terms of energy is fantastic, fantastic. One of the things to look at with any of these groups is religious. Some are very religious, some are very secular, some are very spiritual. That's across, we can't generalize from this. I mean, the groups that tell you they're religious, you actually get there and you find they're not religious at all, and spiritual group, so it's one of the things you look at. Jan will talk a little bit later about the kibbutzim. It's one of the most famous types of intentional communities in the world. And so I'm not going to go in that as now, but it was very, very important in my development when I first went to Israel and spent about 2 months, I think, touring various kibbutzim and getting the feel of what's happening. That was before they started all separating out, as Jan will no doubt talk about. Some groups are hierarchical. In general, they're egalitarian, but some, particularly the religious-based groups, are very hierarchical, and there's very good reasons for that. They believe that this is the right way. So the leader has connections to God or to Buddha or whatever it is, and so we should all follow that person. Others just reject that totally. In terms of sex life, it ranges from free love to complete abstinence across, and I've seen every version of this across the whole thing. I mean, there are many myths about intentional communities. And one is that free love groups never last. Well, pardon my French, but that's bullshit. Some last very, very well for a very long time. Single sex and some are mixed. So I recently wrote a paper researching single sex intentional communities in Australia. I found 4 female only ones and 3 male only ones are doing extremely well. So, I mean, we get those, but in general, they're mixed. And when you find single sex, there's a different dynamic there. Urban, rural. Well, generally the eco-villages are rural and the communes are urban, or co-housing is urban, generally. 2 last points, cults. Now, some of us researching this area like to pretend there's no such thing as a cult and we shouldn't worry about it. And again, I say that's rubbish. Some of these groups turn into very, very nasty cults. I once found myself being not held as almost a prisoner by a group in New Zealand where I was researching because they decided that it wasn't right for me to leave until I'd really got the message from God, sort of thing. So, I mean, some of these groups are really quite spooky. And I'm going to mention the name of one tonight. And so there are cults. It doesn't mean that all intentional communities become cults, anything but that. But the intentional community format, the communal format, strengthens any group, whether it's for good or for evil. And unfortunately, some of the groups in our field are very evil. Last, utopia. Now, nobody in the right mind would ever talk about an intentional community being utopia. On the other hand, the term utopian is very helpful because utopian implies the idea that we're trying to move to a better place, an ideal place in some ways. And most intentional communities are trying to do that. So I would apply the adjective utopian, but definitely not utopia. Okay, Anton? Now, how much history can you give in 5 minutes? And again, Jan's going to pick up a little bit of this. As far as we know, the first intentional community of which we have records were the Essenes in the 2nd century BC. Now, there may have been earlier groups that we simply don't know about, but they were quite important. Pythagoras, you'll all know Pythagoras, the theory, etc., theorem, was in Italy, no, in Greece, sorry, in just before Christ, 52 BC, and we have some records about that. Their spiritual thing was mathematics. Now that sounds a contradiction, but it made a lot of sense to people at the time. It was a mystical sort of thing around mathematics, how it works. We've had Buddhist ashrams, particularly in the Indian subcontinent, God only knows how long. I mean, certainly well before Christ, some of them still going. A number of Christian monastic orders that started in Europe in the Middle Ages, the Cathars, Waldenses, Brethren, etc. None of these last today, none of these exist today, sorry, but we've had a long tradition, and most of them are well recorded. Anabaptists, now we still have a lot of Anabaptists around. There's the Hutterites, Mennonites, Amish, Shakers, Bruderhof. I didn't put Bruderhof in there. We've got a couple of Bruderhof communities here in Australia. Anabaptists are doing very, very well. It's probably one of the fastest growing groups we're talking about here, and they tend to be very nice. As ICSA, we've gone to several Anabaptist groups over the years to visit. Another group you would have heard about, the Moravians. They're very popular in Europe. 300-400 years ago, they came to Australia, North America, set up a lot of communal groups. In fact, Australia's first communal group was a group of breakaway Moravians. And some of the best known 19th century intentional communities would be Amana in the States, New Harmony in the States, New Australia, which was in Paraguay, believe it or not, and Oneida, where they'd be probably some of the best known from that period. But there's a rich, rich history. So if you're a researcher, never find yourself imagining that people, 5 years ago just invented this thing. It's a long, long, long tradition. Anton? Now, what's the number? How many have we got? Well, I'm going through by country just briefly, and excuse me if I'm in UK, for example, we know that the first intentional community, we would call that, hang on, Anton, go ahead one. There, okay. The group called the Familists, or Family of Love, followers of Henry Nice in the 1550s. They lasted for about 200 years. In the 1600s in Britain, we had the Diggers. And most of you will have heard about the Diggers and Dreamers collective. They publish directories every year. Well, that comes from the word diggers. In 1700s, the Moravians I've already referred to came into Britain in a big way, partly because they've been driven out of Europe with religious persecution, etc. In Britain, I'm told, my understanding is the current community is rooted in the anarchist communities, late 1800s. Now, White Way and Brotherhood Church, they still survive from that time, but that's the background to the current groups. The oldest in UK is in the Cotswold, it's White Way, and no doubt the best known is Findhorn Eco Village. And you will all know that Findhorn Foundation has had a lot of problems, but the community is still going very, very strong, and it's by far the best known in UK. So, Anton? In Germany, the first that we can find is a group called Herrenhut in 1722. The best known in Germany today would be, in my opinion, would be Siebenlinden, Zeg, and Lebensgarten. There's, of course, lots more than that, but I think they're the best known. Jan? In America, by the way, America didn't invent these things. There's sometimes people confused because we have so many groups in America, they must have invented it. Well, they didn't. They took it off from other people. The first we know of in America was Savannah River. It's a Moravian settlement in 1635. We estimate now there's between 60 and 100,000 people in about 3,000 or so intentional communities in America. So it's one of the biggest, in fact, it is the biggest movement in the world. For some time, the kibbutz movement was the biggest. Now it's really the American movement that's going on. The oldest intentional community of states is Sabbath Day Lake, established in 1783, and it's still going. Last I heard, they had about 12 or 13 members or something. The best known would be, in my opinion, be the Farm, Twin Oaks, Dancing Rabbit, and Earth Haven. There's lots more, but they're kind of the best, I think. So, Anton? New Zealand, because I live in the Antipodes, I like to talk about, and New Zealand was itself created in a somewhat utopian manner. I mean, it's very different to Australia. Australia was established as a convict settlement. New Zealand wasn't. It was to be this perfect place in the South Pacific sort of thing. Now, in 1874, they started something called Roots Assembly, the first intentional community in New Zealand, very religiously based. In 1933, it only lasted 10 years or something. In 1933, Beeville started, and it's still going. So this is by far the oldest there. No, I'm sorry, it has collapsed now. I'm forgetting. The oldest is Riverside. Some of you might have heard of that. Started as a group of anti-war protesters during the war and trying to protect these people, and it's still going. They've got about 60 members there. very much like the kibbutz model. Very, very similar. They have a farm. They all work together. It's an amazing place. The best known New Zealand ones would be a group called Tui, Gloria Vale, Riverside, and Earth Song. Now, Gloria Vale is one of these horrible groups. You know, I mean, they're forever in the newspaper because of exploitation of women and children. I mean, it's a pretty nasty group, but it's still an intentional community. Okay, and they get probably more publicity than everybody else together and all the other groups together in New Zealand, but it's a pretty horrible situation. So, okay, Anton? Well, of course, I can't ignore Australia. The first in Australia was Herrenhut, established 1852 by a group of breakaway Germans from very east of Germany. They set up a commune, full commune. Everything was shared. There was nothing private. Everybody ate together, slept together, the lot, 1852 to 1889. And I've written a book about them, quite an amazing group of people. The first leader was male, and then when he died, a woman took over, which was totally out of the question for people. How could a woman lead a group like this? Well, she actually led better than he did, but today, we probably have about, and this is I'm depending on one of my students here, about 22,000 people in Australia and about 1,500 intentional communities. It's a bit up in the air, but they're ballpark figures. So arguably, we have probably as many per capita as they have in America, but I'm not sure. The oldest in Australia is called the Manor. It's established in 1920. It's still going. I was there about 2-3 years ago. They're still ticking over right on the edge of Sydney Harbour. If they ever sold the place, they'd get millions and millions of dollars for it, but they're a wonderful group, all women. The best known ones in Australia that some of you will have heard of, Crystal Waters, Currumbin Eco Village, and Murra. Crystal Waters is in Queensland, north of Brisbane. Currumbin is Sunshine, Gold Coast, and Murra is in Victoria. But they're pretty well known, and they've all been going like 50 to 60 years now. So, Anton, who would want to join an intentional community? I found in my research a really, really important, if any of you are researchers, pay attention to this, distinction between what I call because of motivation and in order to motivation. Now, because of motivation is people who join an intentional community because they're lonely or they can't cope on their own or there's something gone wrong in their life. So because of that, they will try anything. So they go to an intentional community. In order to motivation is quite the opposite. It's where you dream, you fantasize, this is the way I can live the perfect life. This is the way I can live close to nature or whatever. So there's a huge difference in how those two groups of people go through and how they progress. I won't go into much detail, but I find that one of the key distinctions when people come to me talking about joining an intentional community. I want to know, now, are you a because of or in order to person? Age, well, look, there's a myth that intentional communities only appeal to young people. That's rubbish. It's mainly a middle-aged phenomenon, and it's becoming more and more a phenomenon for older people. Class, it's certainly middle class, I'd say. Gender, generally, all of my research shows more women than men in intentional communities. Now, I'm talking about the non-religious ones. Some religious ones, of course, are only men. Education, they're remarkably well educated in general, certainly above the national average. Nationality, there's no real difference there. It doesn't. Race, again, not much difference. You get other factors coming in so much, but in general, I'd say it's middle class, white, general around the world, but there are so many exceptions to that. But anyway, okay, Anton. I'm a brave man. What's the future of intentional communities? I've been researching this for 51 years. And what do I think going good or bad? Well, the big, if I was an investor and had some money, want to make some money, I'd invest in senior co-housing. From what certainly in Australia and from what I understand around the world, that's an extraordinarily fast growing group, movement, because of people in my age group. I'm just before the baby boom. But the baby boomers are coming through. It's very expensive. It's very lonely living in a nursing home or something. Senior co-housing seems to be the answer. And so I think that's going to really grow over the years. It is growing now. It's growing in every country that I've been able to get research on. Second, suburban eco-villages. At the moment, we think of eco-villages out in the country somewhere where there's lots of rolling fields and everything else. Groups that come together can handle a great deal of money, can get it together, a lot of money to buy up. And so we get these suburban eco-villages. So they'll buy up 10 houses, knock down some fences, and they create that as an eco-village. And it has all the advantages of having buses stopping out front, etc. So I think that's going to grow dramatically, these suburban ones. Small urban communes are coming back in. These are typically for young professionals. They want to rent a fantastic ritzy apartment on the top level that's costing them, $5,000 a week or something. They can do it, no problem. There's 10 of us here. It's very easy to do. We'll have a servant, a cook to come, no problem. You get all these. So that's very much happening around the world as far as I can see. Finally, and unfortunately, we're going to see a great increase in the number of right-wing antisocial survivalist groups. We had one in Queensland only about 2 years ago where they killed 3 policemen. Some of these groups are pretty horrible. And again, my point is, don't think that intentional community equals good and really nice. Some of them are really horrible. And these are the ones. But the point is, living together as an intentional community gives you extraordinary amount of power, of control. You have 20 people, 30, 50 people backing you. You have enormous amount of resources from everybody chipping in, even if you're poor. So these groups can be used for good or evil. And I do fear that the evil ones are certainly increasing. Now, whether they take it over or not, I don't know. Anton? Thank you very much. Good luck with your own research. If there's any questions or comments, I think we're looking at that later, Taisa, if I know, but I'm happy to do what I can and try and answer them or whatever. So over to you, Anton.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much. I will first celebrate you. I feel very few people could do a presentation like this, and how rich is the history and contribution from communities and intentional communities. That's really impressive. Thank you for sharing your 50 years of
51.
experience.
51.
51, exactly. 51. Wonderful. So questions, please. You are either invited to write your questions on the chat or keep it so you don't forget it, or keep it. We will open space towards the end. And I'm now going to move on because we still have other amazing presenters. And I'm glad to open the mic to Jan Martin Bank. Jan is a permaculture designer and teacher. He is the former president of ICSA, leading activist in environmental projects and eco-village developments over 20 years. He has been living in income-sharing communities for 30 years in Israel and Norway. And he's also author of several books. Thank you, Jan, for being here today with us. Over to you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Taisa. It's great. Actually, this works perfectly because Bill and I, we kind of fill each other out. Bill is a rigorous researcher, and I'm full of admiration. I'm not. I'm just a kind of ordinary guy who's lived in community for a while and looked at it. But I have great pictures. So where Bill falls down on the technical side, I can share my screen with you and show you pictures. When I first made this presentation, we're looking at the social impact of intentional communities. And I thought, well, let's show you a few things. The picture in the middle there is from the first communist town in Europe. And then we have a couple of eco-villages. And then at the bottom, a lot of people dancing. We like people dancing. And that's a Camp Hill village. And I'm going to tell you about those. But I also want to go back, and I want to go back much further than Bill. And here's a bunch of guys here. I think they're guys. They kind of look like either they're dancing or they're running to catch the next mastodon or something. But in any case, they're about 10,000 years ago. And they definitely, if you dance, you're in a community. That's how it works. People have always lived in communities. And I even got a couple of pictures from an archaeological book at a village about 3,000 years ago in Europe. So we've been living in village, in community villages for a long time. I just want to just correct you, Bill. I love it when I can correct a professor. I barely got a degree myself, but actually Pythagoras was around 530 BC. He was actually one of these guys who went out and did it. And I like the picture at the bottom on the right here because he's there teaching a group of women. And the whole thing about, vegetarian, anti-sexist, he was doing this way back there. And so I like to think of him as one of the founders of what we talk about intentional communities. You mentioned monasteries a little bit. This guy with a beard, I think his beard's great. I wish I had a beard like that. That's Benedict. And Benedict wrote his rule around 400, 500 AD in our counting. So his rule is still being used. So here's somebody who has created something a millennia and a half ago, and there are still hundreds, if not thousands, of monks and nuns and other people who use his book as either a guideline or an inspiration. So we've been around, like Bill's messages, we've been around a long time. So we like to think of Benedict. I have a little role to play here because I'm actually descended from the Vikings, and the monasteries in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages in Europe, they were the places that kept knowledge and spirituality alive from people like me. And so I put a picture there that me and my grandson were getting tooled up to raid a monastery, just to show you that, history is still alive. But we've stopped doing it now, actually. We've getting better. This church is from Tabor, which in 1420 was a communist town where all things were owned in common. And that's a kind of community. They didn't last that long, actually, and were defeated. And a lot of the people who were there and who followed this tradition disappeared into the forests of Bohemia. And a few years later, this nice old guy at the top there, that's Amos Comenius, he founded the Moravian Church, or one of the Brotherhood of Unity Church. And hundreds of years later, 300 years later, some of them turned up in this village you see at the bottom, and that village is called Herrenhut. And that was what Bill mentioned. So there you are. I'm the illustrator to Bill's knowledge on this. Just remember this guy, Amos Comenius. He's going to reappear a bit later in our story. The diggers and dreamers, the diggers were, I think it was 16 something. They didn't last very long, 2 or 3 years maybe. But the whole thing, diggers and dreamers, these ideas, and we're going to come back to this because this is very important. These ideas have a life of their own, and you never know what will happen to your idea if it gets taken up later on. So just to add to that, Bill, I could tell you that in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a group of people in California called the Diggers. You may have come across them. They were a voluntary group who helped people who had done too much drugs. There was a lot of drugs there then. And they were also inspired by Gerald Winstanley. So, you know, these ideas live on. Robert Owen, he's very dear to us in the ICSA because we've had one of our conferences at New Lanark, which he founded in Scotland in order to make industrialization acceptable rather than exploitable. And this was it was owned by him, but he treated the people there very well who worked there and gave them rights and a decent living. And I'm an educator, I'm a teacher. I love his education because he's quoted as saying, "Do not trouble children with books." And I think, you know, experiential education is all the thing. He also started something up in North America called New Harmony, and neither of these places are communes any longer. They're not communities, but they are both places where you can go and research and feel the traditions of community. So Bill mentioned again this massive emigration from Europe. And we actually, in Amana village, we had one of our ICSA conferences. And in fact, that's where I met Dan, who is somewhere on the screen, I think. That's where we first met. And the other thing, now I can't see it properly here because I have the pictures of people. But the thing in the top right is the temple of something or other, which is a bunch of theosophists who arrived in California in 1909. They're still there, and they have their temple, and they still live there in a little village and do their theosophy. And of course, for us people who are inspired by anthroposophy, this is part of our heritage in a sense. Let's go to the interwar years, because not all communes or intentional communities are significant. Now, I don't know, can you guys see, there should be a person on the top right hand here with a great hat and a big moustache. Can anybody see that? Nod if you can see it. Okay, that's Gurdjieff, a Caucasian mystic from about 100 years ago. After the First World War, he founded a commune in France, which lasted a few years. I think it totally disappeared until many years ago, I came across a Gurdjieff commune in the Galilee in Israel, and it's still there today. So the thing about these things is that they have this life of their own. The place in the middle here, Dartington Hall, is now Schumacher College, which is also a place which disseminates knowledge and skills in ecology, in social living, in spirituality. And that was started in the war year, 1920s, 30s, and it has morphed through different reincarnations, but it's still there. And there was a fascinating book by Anna Neymer called The Utopians. If anybody was at the ICS conference in Denmark a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, she was one of the presenters there. Now I'm on my home turf. Camp Hill was founded by this eminent gentleman in the bottom right corner here, Carl Koenig. And in his study, which is preserved, he died many years ago, but his study is still preserved as part of a research center. And he has 3 pictures on the wall there. And they are the bottom picture here. The person at the top is Amos Comenius. The bottom left-hand person is Count Zinzendorf. And the person on the right is Robert Owen. And these were called the 3 pillars of Camp Hill. because they represented three different aspects of community. And for me, here it ties it all together. These threads of ideas, they go through history and they tie a knot, and suddenly you get a Camp Hill network. Now, Camp Hill network was set up in 1939 by refugees from Nazi Austria. Many of them were Jewish, but all of them were intellectuals and anthroposophists and radicals. It's still going today, well over 100 communities around the world, in many, many countries. And in a sense, you could say that they kind of they are small, but not many people know about them. This is a plaque from the school. They have a lot of interaction with Steiner schools, Waldorf education, but their main work is living and working with people with special needs. I always say that it's mostly people with special needs who live and work with people who don't think they have special needs. And usually it's a very kind of rural thing. You like to see that's from a Norwegian Camp Hill, people dancing in a circle. You see, we're back to dancing again. It's going to come through all the time. It'll come up again later. And if we look at some of the things they do, they have been very active in biodynamic agriculture. So for those of you who can speak Norwegian, bottom left is biodynamic agriculture in Norwegian. And one of the things that they did was to start CSAs, community supported agriculture, which is not essentially a commune thing or an intentional community thing. It's a way of organizing agriculture where the consumer and the producer make an agreement to share the work and the expenses and the risks of producing food. And the first one in the United States is the picture from the bottom right there is from Kimberton Hills, which was the first CSA in the United States. And it's now a serious way of organizing agriculture so that people get to eat. And we do like to eat. So that's one of the things that they've been very important in. Let's go on to kibbutz, because as much as I love Camp Hill, I'm also very much in love with kibbutz. And Alon did point out a few minutes ago that actually there are still nearly 300 kibbutzim in Israel. There's a figure of between 150 and 200,000 people who live in kibbutz. Some are very communal, others are slightly less communal. There is a tendency in nearly all communities to become less radical as they grow older. It doesn't always happen, but there is a tendency towards that. And kibbutz was so radical in the beginning that you didn't even get your post. Well, if you got a letter, it was read out to you at the general meeting. So that was very communal. And today you get post. It's okay. You can get your own private post and nobody has to read it. So there is this tendency towards that. It's important to remember that kibbutz was set up not in a modern country, but on the fringe of a dying empire. It was the Syrian province, or the Damascus province of the Ottoman Empire. And it was pretty defunct, really. And so it was pretty much the Wild West. You can go and do anything you wanted to do. And people were driven out of Eastern Europe. Jewish people were driven out of Eastern Europe by the repression of Jews, by the, they were just warming up for the Holocaust, basically. Let's see how many Jews we can kill. And so many of them got out, went to America, came here to Norway, they went to England, and some went to what was then Palestine. And some of them were socialists, and they set up kibbutz. And in the 20s and 30s, of course, massive numbers of Jews fled Europe and Russia because of the increasing anti-Semitism, and this was one of the places they could go. And so the kibbutz movement was very successful in being a place where people go and settle and make a living for themselves and their community. And because of that, the kibbutz became an intentional community movement in a country which didn't really have a government. The British mandate was basically the British army running around, not doing very much. So the kibbutz became a big network. They built roads, they built factories, they had bus cooperatives, they built housing cooperatives, they did all kinds of stuff to set up the infrastructure for a modern state. And the interesting thing from our point of view in the ICSA is that one of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence was Mordechai Bentov. And he had a series of letters going around the world in the 70s to communes, and he made a newsletter out of this. And he was one of the signatories. And out of that network, it was from that network that the ICSA actually arose. And so the kibbutz is very important. The kibbutz significance has to do with agriculture. Organic agriculture was first started in Israel on a kibbutz. And on the kibbutz that I lived in for many years, we had the first eco-village gathering of Global Eco-Village Network Israel, and that's a picture from that meeting, which was for me very, very moving. And actually there's a program there. It says Gen Israel, if it's not yet. So that was a few years ago now. But the kibbutzim are very much in that line there. And there's a bunch of people there picking olives on my kibbutz. We have 1,500 organic olive trees. Post World War II, this is where I grew up, you know, and in fact, if I hadn't been taking that picture, I'd have been dancing in that circle. And for those of you who haven't been to Lebensgarten, this is what they do at Lebensgarten. And that's where I'm going back to next summer. This was a fun time, you know, we lived in communes, we thought it was great. You know, there was a window of opportunity there, so it was fun to live in communities. But let's go to a more somber thing, climate change. I assume you've all heard of that. The IPCC is probably the biggest gathering of scientists organized that we've had on the planet, at least one of them. This was their report 2 years ago, and the picture on the front is from Findhorn Eco-Village in Scotland. And their conclusion at the end is basically a description of some of the aspects that you would find in an intentional community or an eco-village, fostering experimentation, learning and social change, technological innovations. It's all those things. So let's see if we can find some of those things happening. This is Findhorn. Bill, I got your pictures of Findhorn, you see. We are both fellows of Findhorn. And these are some of the things we've seen there. They have their own money. They have their own currency. They grow some of their own food. They build houses which are round and square. So it's for all kinds of people. You know, you want to be a square, you get a square house. You want to be a round, you get a round house. Or you can build a round house. And the bottom picture on the right, it's a spiritual community. This is their meditation center. And that's great, okay? That's lovely village. But what happens around Findhorn? Here we go. The sprouts of Findhorn. These pictures were taken in the course of a morning when I went round the local town of Findhorn, 4 miles away, just to see what Findhorn people who had left Findhorn were doing. And it just shows you all kinds of solar systems, waste things, transition towns, a Steiner school, car sharing things. These are things outside of Findhorn that Findhorn people have initiated. And so I like to end this by saying that we have two significant things here. This one here shows the local things that are happening in and around Findhorn itself. But if we go back 2 pictures, here we have a global awareness of how those local things can be translated into social things. So basically, I'd like to end by saying we have developed all the tools to overcome the crises that we have right now. The recipes are all there. They're just waiting to be taken up by other people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for your inspiring thoughts. Here we go. Wow, it's such a rich session. We could keep going on and on with questions and comments, but I will move on as we agreed at the beginning, and maybe we can take a deep breath together and prepare to welcome our last presenter. And I'm very grateful to be here with you today, Iris. Let me properly introduce you. Iris is a sociologist, a researcher, an author, coach, and project manager in the field of sustainable lifestyles, communities, social innovations, and civil society movements since 2001. She's currently living in a tiny house in a rural community in Austria. She is an awarded scholar. She got the Starting Scholar Award in 2011 by the Communal Studies Association from the United States. And I could go on, but I will pause here and open the floor to you. Iris will share a bit about intentional communities as transformative social innovations. You're very welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Taisa, very much for introducing. And yeah, thank you for sharing this webinar together also with Bill and Jan. And it was very inspiring to listen to your speeches. And that's perfectly fitting because what I will talk about now is very much based on what you have introduced. So my focus will be on the potential of intentional communities for social transformation and societal transformation at the moment. Yeah, so what we have heard now from the intentional community movement and the history, yeah, what you have told, my research was very much focused on the contemporary potential. What is actually happening now in our societies and what contribution do intentional communities give for social change? So what I will tell you now is mainly based on the research projects of my diploma, my PhD, which was on social change and intentional communities, and on what we have built up at the University of Münster in Germany, where actually also one of the Middle Ages community movement has happened. The anti-baptized was very strong there. And yeah, in another issue. But then also we received international funding, several projects where we could look into movements of grassroots innovations like intentional communities. So I wanted to start now, what is actually social change? Yeah, because we wanted to relate to this aspect. And as a geographer and sociologist that I am, I have researched now modern individualized society also a bit. And what we observe now is a high divorce rate. We have a high number of single households in the big cities. Maybe now it's more than 50% in general, I don't know. So we have a really fast erosion of the social networks and the community networks we had from the past, and what you introduced also with the monasteries. So there is a lot of, and the farms, the villages, this is all still eroding. And in our modern society, this has brought a lot of freedom, emancipation for women mainly also, and the differentiation of culture, and that we can choose our individual lifestyles today. This is really the advantage of this modern lifestyle, where people are very, isolated in a way, but we can choose our own lifestyle. And the old communities, most of them, were more like, so it was defined, the role were defined. So, and now we observe a counter movement from civil society that responds to this erosion of communities, and they reinvent community in a new manner. And this is already what you introduced, that of course these kind of movements, they have been there throughout history, that Pythagoras in Old Greek, they also reinvented community in a new manner. And now we have it even stronger. You see, it's like the little picture down there on the right. It's like the concrete of society, that the politics that have rules and market profit systems and everything. And then the little plants coming through again and again, these little plants of community living, of really connecting to each other on a very basic human need. Yeah, so, and they give a counter movement here. And in this project where we got funding from the European Union, we identified different crises that are happening right now in our times: the financial crisis, the climate change, and the ICT revolution. And there are different movements responding to these crises. The new social economy, the low impact living, which is of course a large part of what intentional communities and eco-villages are doing. And then also the open source movement, responding to the changes in AI, artificial intelligence, and all around it. And this is all about systemic change on different levels. We have these larger game changers, we have the transformative paradigms, and we have these social innovations of grassroots movements. So this is really a very complex situation that we have at the moment. And we referred to this theoretical approach of Professor Geels in the Netherlands. He called it like a multi-level perspective on transitions. And why I refer to it now, you see on the bottom the niche innovations. And this is what we have in these intentional communities and eco-villages, because this is just a little percentage of society and a little percentage of people who live like this. And they have these very innovative ideas and these very helpful practices, and they transform it part by part into systems, into economic systems, cultural systems, political environments, technological things. And it goes step by step into the mainstream and into the socio-technical landscape of our societies. Also, we had this in the EU, that social innovation was recognized as very important in addition to technical innovation. This was just here 12 years ago, as you can see. so that they got the impression, okay, we need social innovations. And so these community initiatives came into focus also for politics. And we received funding in 2014 for a large EU research project and could do research on all these initiatives. Yeah, because what we observe now is actually from a sociological point of view, as I mentioned already, we have social pathologies, yeah, and dilemmas of modernity. Here, freedom versus commitment, spontaneity versus consistency, creativity versus consumption, and the adventure versus the humdrum of daily life. So, like, and the commercialization of our personal environments of our life. And yeah, so the colonialization of life word, it was called by a German social philosopher, actually. And intentional communities work with all this and have approaches to heal these dilemmas, because they bring the advantages of community, but in a different manner, in a more individual free manner. They combine this. And here I have collected some voices for you from different researchers on intentional communities over the last decades. They call intentional communities a social movement entity. They work with developmental communalism and strive for utopian visions, like Bill mentioned already. Yeah, they have a revitalization movement, a cultural critique to the actual the contemporary society we are living in. So they revitalize community now. And while what we have researched in Münster is like their approach is more innovative, because natural communities like families tend to subordinate to society and to societal structures. But intentional communities strive for intervention and creation of society. Like Jan has beautifully illustrated with the kibbutz movement in Israel. Yeah, they were really, and also USA, what Bill mentioned, they are really part of the society and they co-create society. Yeah, so they are social ecological transformation experiments, like I called them, and of course, social innovation initiatives. So the Global Eco-Village Network was one of 20 global networks we researched. Also cooperative housing here and other networks in the areas of economy, housing, living, and IT, who are active in doing the social change in society. So you can find a lot of publications also here on this website. I will not go into detail with this now, except here we ordered these movements towards their approaches in society, because society is very much separated into here government, market, community. So community is actually the private life, the private households. Market is, of course, the economy, and everything in government is the state and the official rules, how this is all organized. And these movements, they operate on the thresholds of these sectors. They are like in the middle, they are part of the third sector, it's called. They operate on the threshold between non-profit and profit, between public and private, and between formal and informal. So, and here the Global Eco-Village Network is especially formal informal, which means our private life with community, and then the official life with laws and how this is ruled. And of course, I see them also in the other areas. But however, to give you an idea that there are many different movements, and I see that the intentional community movement and eco-village movement, they are very holistic in comparison to many of these other movements you can see here. So in this research project, we said, okay, social innovation, social change, what is this actually? And we turned out, after a lot of research, it's about new forms of knowing, doing, framing, and organizing. So it's a change in social relations. This is actually the core. So, and communities are, of course, working in all these 4 aspects. And I will give you now concrete examples. Here, new ways of framing and doing is, for example, in communities, the life change habits and infrastructure at the same time. Because if you live in a family, in a city, you can change your habits, but you can only very limited change the infrastructure, because you are dependent on the city, on the landlord, on the company where you work, and so on. But in these communities, they can change many different things at the same time. Because in eco-village, for instance, they create a full-featured village that provides many different structures and frames for car sharing, for ecological housing, for organizing the family life with child care, with elderly people care. They can grow their own food. They have self-sufficiency. They have collective ownership. They have democratic bodies, including community building. They have cultural events, like you can see here on the bottom picture in the eco-village Siebenlinden, where I lived many years. We had these cultural events there also for people from the environment, and we had shared meals here, and so on. Yeah, if we try to understand what this actually happens in the eco-village, it transforms individual people in their intentions, aims, and also in their personal relationships, and of course their entire life. Yeah, because the community building, is an informal commitment also. People come together and they go together and go in this adventure of community building with informal aspects and also formal commitments. This is combined. Yeah, it's not an opposite, but they combine this. They have contracts, for instance, where they own the real estate together, and what happens if someone steps out, and so on. So the picture on the upper right was from my inauguration in Siebenlinden, where we gave where we signed the contract, and it was a ritual, like really joining the community. It was very moving also for us, and something that we could feel and not just sign on the paper. So so the community as a manifested form. And it's a laboratory of constant social learning, where those who live in this community, they change constantly from this old culture and society where we were grown up, and we were changing into this new culture that the community has created with everything before, like the common ground and the ideas and the intentions. And then living in this community, it spreads out via the companies they have, via the social political engagement they have, like Finton has created UN training center for local authorities, and it goes into the local area. And people who come for seminars, education, they will bring it back to their environment, their families, their work environment, whatsoever. Thousands of years, thousands of people have gone through these community seminar centers and have learned all these methods and have incorporated this kind of culture, at least a bit. Yeah, and to summarize this a bit, so communities start with intentions. Yeah, they have values consciously written down and agreed upon about cooperation, sustainability, whatever, or spiritual ideas. Also, it can be evil, like Bill mentioned, of course. It can be also, it's not a guarantee that all communities have good ideas, of course. Yeah. So they are experiments in all different kinds. So, and then community building happens, and some sort of conflict resolution is important. Otherwise, the community will fall apart, because the individualized societies that we have in our democratic countries, they are give the guarantee that people can always step out. They don't need to stick into the communities. Like in Middle Ages, probably people didn't have like really the opportunity to step out. As a woman, you had to stay in the monastery or into whatever you were. Otherwise, you were, yeah, lost. So today, it's really also a kind of pressure for the communities to make it attractive for the members. Otherwise, they will just leave. Yeah. So, and they create, of course, participatory community structures. Land and housing properties are owned by community units. They organize it in a charitable, non-profit way. Most of the communities that I have researched as good examples, at least. And the members can co-create community. Yeah, so far. And another interesting concept we have here came developed in this research project, Transformative Social Innovation Theory, is that we see these communities, they challenge, alter, replace, and provide alternatives to dominant institutions. So this is really a multidimensional approach they do to create new seedlings for a sustainable society here, with system innovation, game changers, social innovation, and with these different aspects here: governance, social learning, resourcing, monitoring. These 4 dimensions are important for them, that they can, yeah, empower social innovation. Yeah, and also from different surveys we did over the years in the University of Münster, we found out that people are longing for community. Yeah, they are looking for a cozy nest and for yeah, and this is of course also a danger, what Bill mentioned already. Yeah, if your motivation, from where is it coming? Yeah, is it coming from a loss, or if you are really ready to experience something new? Yeah, and the key is personal development and social capacity building, that every individual in society already, of course, and in the community has to do, that this will work, this experiment of a community, because it's based on voluntary membership, and initiatives need to meet individual needs, as I said, and individual empowerment, on the other hand, needs, of course, this capabilities, yeah, to be self-responsible, to be empowered in a way, and take responsibility with the others in the community. You cannot give responsibility towards the state. Yeah, living in a society where the state rules everything, and you just give a cross for elections in the democratic state, and that's everything, doesn't work. In community, you really need to be a co-creator. And yeah, this needs to be educated to people who want to found community, yeah, to people who in society. Yeah, and eco-villages and intentional communities transfer their experiences on 3 levels. Yeah, this is here a summary of what I will say, that social change reaches out of these communities. It does not stay there in islands or separated communities, but it goes out via the visitors, via business contacts, networks into the region, and also on the global level via social networks, political activities, like the Eco-Village network works together with the UN and with the UNESCO. So and Taisa, of course, is a very active teacher in this Gaia education program, and and spreads out all these ideas in a wonderful way throughout the globe. So, economic crisis, climate change, communities show that there are alternative practices, hands-on, ground level, already practiced in communities here, that we have solutions for low impact living, for new social economy, and all different other aspects of sustainable lifestyles. So for my last slides, I would like to make shortly mention to you this manifesto of transformative social innovation. That was one of our outcomes in this research project some years ago. You're welcome to check it out. It's about, whoa, what we can do also to bring all these wonderful, living examples of communities more into the society here. And this is a manifesto addressed to politicians, to business people. Like, this can really transfer out. With this, thank you very much. Here you can have a look into publications from me over the years on many different aspects of communities, so that I have published over the years, and my website with videos. And I'm happy to have introduced all this to you, and looking forward to discuss with you. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Iris. Thank you so much for your contributions. It was really rich. And maybe you can, let's come back to the big circle. I know there are many people here in the audience that also study communities or live in community, and we want to open the floor for questions, comments, reflections. We have a few minutes for that. Whoever is ready to ask a question or bring your insights. How did you hear all these amazing presentations? How can you weave it together or complement? I will wait for a second, and we can also open for the presenters if you have questions to each other or comments.
So I could say something.
Please, Graham.
Graham Meltzer, living in Findhorn for about 20 years. Findhorn's had much mention in all of the presentations, and very positively for the most part. But I know a lot of people have heard on the rumor mill that Findhorn is closing down, I've heard. But this is absolutely not the case. In the chat, I put a bit of an explanation that in fact it's the Findhorn Foundation, which was really, I guess, the founding body in many ways, that is struggling for financial reasons, for various reasons, but mostly triggered by COVID. But the community itself is going strong. So I would just encourage people to change their view on that. The community is looking at buying much of the land, the infrastructure, and the buildings from the Findhorn Foundation and self-managing, much as most intentional communities do from the outset. They manage their own assets, whereas the Findhorn community has, in a sense, been living under the skirts of the mother and been looked after by the foundation in many dimensions. So now there's a chance that the community can take more control of its destiny and its assets, and most people are very excited about it. We're in the process of purchase, and it's a phased purchase, and it's very challenging, but there are some great people steering it, and I, for one, am very excited. A lot of people are very concerned, frightened, scared about how we'll manage financially with all of the responsibility, but for the most part, most of us are excited. That's me. And I would encourage you all to come visit. We still take many, many visitors constantly.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add something about change. They tell you a very short story. At the beginning of kibbutz, they only had one kettle in the dining room. And then at some point in the 20s or 30s, people decided they wanted their own kettle at home. It was a major crisis of the kibbutz movement, that this is the end of the kibbutz movement if people have private kettles at home. It's well known in the kibbutz movement. There, changes happen all the time. And it seems often when you are in the middle of the change that this is the end of days. And I think the same myth is happening about Findhorn. There are still hundreds of people living there. They are going about their lives. They are still impacting the rest of society and the globe as a whole. So it takes a lot, actually, to destroy an intentional community. Anyway,
over 50-year-old intentional community. Yeah. Thank you, Jan. And I think it's important just to say it is a transition moment for several communities and eco-villages. And we know, like, I travel a lot around communities. We heard about Findhorn, but also Auroville and Tamera and Zeg, and many big structured communities are in transition moments. And that's all about change and reinventing themselves and adapting to the new context. Over to you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you so much for these great presentations. I have a question really directed to all three presenters. So you've talked about the ways intentional communities contribute to social change. But some people would worry that intentional communities actually diminish the potential for social change because they take people with a lot of ideas and energy and separate them from the larger society that they might hope to change. This is the worry, most famously expressed by Karl Marx. And I wonder what concrete examples you've seen of communities taking action to mitigate that risk.
Whoever is ready, you can just open your mic. Very good question. Bill, yeah, you can open your mic. There's the audio button. Let's see if I can help you. Ask to unmute. Oh, yeah, now. Oops. No, you closed your mic again. Just one more second, Bill. We will make it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think Dan's point is very good, and I think there is that risk. But I would counter that with the strength is that there's a place, a safe haven, a productive, rich place where people who are a bit weird, a bit out there, a bit unusual, a bit radical in some way, to live, to test their theories. Then those, most of them, of course, don't work. You know, the intentional community movement globally forever has been basically that most of them end up failing kind of thing. But some, of course, do work. And I think that's the strength of intentional communities, that they allow people to do their experiments at a small scale, which you couldn't do at a country scale or a you know, global scale, but you could do it at a small level. And I think we've seen a lot of that. And sexual openness would be one, for example, where we've seen a lot of very dynamic groups right out there in the fringe experimenting. And a lot of these some worked and a lot of them didn't work. And I think we collectively have learned about that. So while I hear you, Dan, and I understand the concern, I actually think it works the opposite way, that I think it overall is a great help and supporter to global change, because of these little experimental groups going. The impact Findhorn has had over the last 50 years is almost unmeasurable. The impact the kibbutz has had over the years. There's so many thousands of people living communally kind of thing. I think that's extraordinarily powerful message to send out. So there endeth the lesson.
Wonderful. And let's continue this conversation. So Jan and then Iris.
Yeah, I would say that very few communities are cut off from the society around them. Most of them are somehow embedded in them. And it's no real different between a community and a bunch of any bunch of people who want to start something new. They don't go out of society. They are in society. Most communities are visitable. You can visit them. Most communities have a setup where they encourage visitors, and many people from communities also go out to society and do things. And even a so-called failed community can have tremendous impact if 20 or 30 people go out and form collectives or all kinds of other things inspired by their inspiration in community. I'm not sure Karl Marx got everything he said absolutely right.
Thanks, Jan.
Yeah, thank you, Bill and Jan. And to add what you said, so there are so-called gated communities. Yeah, this is in geography. We had research on them. And this is actually the opposite, because they are not intentional communities. This is a business model, top down, from developer-led settlements, and they sell apartments like in India, in like really bad cities or what, and then the rich people are gated and protected from the poor. And this is like really segregation of society. This is gated society, but not these intentional communities. I mean, when I give advice also to people who want to found a community, find a new community, and what I observed from the really large projects here in Germany, the ones that Bill mentioned, also Sieben Linden, Zeg, and Lebensgarten and others, they all started from the beginning on to be open and invite the neighbors, the region, the mayor, to invite them and be open what they do there. And this is important. I really always give advice to these new founder groups that they should do this from the beginning on, of course. Otherwise, there is the danger to be called a sect or a cult, which happened also a lot, but that's prejudice from the normal people in most of the cases I observed. So that's, what I can say about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are on time to wrap up, but maybe I will just check if there is any final burning questions or comments. I know it was a lot and very rich, and we could easily continue. So maybe we have another couple of minutes to complete.
Just a quick question. Do we know what the focus of the next seminar will be?
Yes, we do. Jan, would you like to share a little bit about the next conference? I'm just pasting the link. The call of papers is open.
Yeah, the conference in the summer is focusing on a theme about economics of community. But in my humble opinion, the theme of the conference is not always very strict. And if a paper is proposed that has any kind of value to anyone interested in the phenomenon of intentional community, they would not be barred from presenting because they don't address the issue of community economics. I think, though, community economics is important. As we've seen, many communities have difficulties with their economies, and not just communities. People do, businesses do, and so on, and governments do as well, I believe. The theme will be economics, but the subjects will be as wide as you could make them, all you people here who want to join in.
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear, but I actually meant the second of the series of 3 seminars.
Not yet. We will announce it very soon.
Actually, I can add here that this was a trial run, and we decided that if it's a complete flop, then we will not carry on doing this. And we rest in your hands whether this was a flop or not. It didn't sound like a flop to me. It sounded pretty good, but I'm not. I shouldn't say that though, because I was.
It was an amazing session, Jan.
I really enjoyed it.
As time is running fast, I could continue sharing and learning from you, but it's our time. So maybe I will invite our presenters for one final reflection. And if there are any final insights or comments.
But maybe there is another question. I don't know. That would be, I would prefer to hear another question. Didn't we? A short, brief time.
It was a bit short. We can expand and prepare for maybe 2 hours in the next session. Is there any other question?
No.
Okay, Beatriz, we can go on a little bit longer.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentations. It was, time flew, it was really well spent time. And since all of you have highlighted how eco-villages can foster both individual and group empowerment, I was wondering what could work best for eco-villages to ensure long-term engagement and preventing burnout, because maybe the demands of sustainability are a very difficult effort, and people can't feel. So I would like to hear a little bit about that, please.
Are you starting with the answer, Jan?
I certainly am, and it's very short, actually. If you want people to come and play in your sandpit, it's got to be fun. If it's not fun, people don't really want to join.
And can I just, yeah,
Of course.
Can I just say that change is inevitable? It's one of the fundamental laws of Buddhism, that impermanence, everything changes over time. Intentional communities change. So the ones I talked about that are hundreds of years old, of course, they've changed dramatically. But that's just the natural part of life. But because a intentional community changes, and it changes the people in it, doesn't mean it's failed. Depends which directions it's changing. And in general, most of the communities are changing to the better and people to the better. But I also warn once again, there are the other sides to it that I've unfortunately had to spend some of my time studying, and some pretty horrible sides where it leads to abuse and all that sort of thing. But in general, that's not the pattern. The pattern is a very positive one of people maturing, becoming more sophisticated, of providing models for what people in the larger community can look at and say, gosh, gee whiz, that actually works. It's possible to live with 23 other people. It's possible to live in an expensive mansion on Sydney Harbor, which the people of the manor do, because there's enough of them. I mean, the house they live in, I don't know, it'd be many, many millions of dollars to buy. It'd be impossible. And yet they live there in this beautiful mansion because they're a commune, and they've been going 101 years now. So, I mean, I don't want us to get despair about these things. I think there's a lot of positive there, as well as some of the negative. That's enough for me.
Thank you,
It's
Bill.
late here. I'm
Thank
going
you.
to bed.
Any other comment, question, final reflection as we prepare to conclude? Thank you, Anton. So that's time for maybe
you,
a
Anton.
final round in how are you living this session in one word? And I can start. I'm very grateful and inspired. And you can all open your mics or write on the chat, whatever is
I've
easy.
enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it. Seeing colleagues.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to meet you. Hopefully we'll meet again.
Such a richness and deepness of all this. So I'm really trusting community. It will last forever.
Hmm. Happy and hopeful. Abundance of resources. Enjoyed it very much. Reconnected. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We will soon share more about the next session in January. Very nice to see you, and I hope to see all of you in person to celebrate ICSA's 40th anniversary in Germany. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.